Hi, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is a podcast about craft tables and creativity. Todd Oldham, my guest today, is hard to define. In the 80s and 90s, he was a well-known fashion designer, but he also has designed furniture, interiors, and products. He had a segment on MTV's House of Style in the early 90s and then hosted his own show on MTV in 1999. He was the creative director for Old Navy and designed lines for Target and Lazy Boy. But today, Todd is perhaps best known for the books he's worked on. In 2007, he published a beautiful, massive monograph on the artist and illustrator Charley Harper, and has continued putting out books on subjects ranging from designer Alexander Girard to the interior design magazine Nest to people like John Waters and Joan Jett. I have a very distinct memory of discovering Todd's work. I saw his Lazy Boy collection in 2003 as a 13 or 14-year-old who was interested in interior design and furniture design and really loved what he was doing there. And it's been really fascinating and weird, frankly, to grow up and find his work still fascinating to me, especially as he's become someone really interested in recovering these historical figures who have also meant a lot to me in my work. And so this is a really special conversation for me. It's a wide-ranging and really inspiring conversation about what it means to be a person who makes things and puts them out into the world. We talk about Todd's childhood and how he was instilled at a very early age about valuing creativity. We talk about his time in the fashion world and how that's influenced this sort of second career he's had as a publisher, as a writer, as a historian. And we, of course, talk about those books and his process from research to writing to the role of design history and why he's continually drawn to these multidisciplinary figures. If you like this show, I hope you consider supporting it on Patreon. We offer 3 monthly tiers, $3 for students, $5 for patrons, and $10 for superfans. All of those tiers give you access to all sorts of bonus content like monthly newsletters, early episodes, transcripts, and exclusive bonus interviews, all while helping to financially support this show. So if you like Scratching the Surface, if you want to see it continue, I hope you consider joining us on Patreon. You can visit patreon.com/surface podcast for all the details and to help support the show. As always, thank you so much for your support and for listening. And here is me with Todd Oldham. I've been following your work for half my life before I was a graphic designer, I was really interested in architecture and interior design and furniture. And so when I was 13 or 14 years old, somehow I came across an advertisement for your Lazy Boy collection in 2013.
Yes. Uh-huh.
I had never heard of you before. I did not know about the fashion work. I did not know about the MTV stuff. I was like, I had just missed that. I was a little bit too young for that. But I saw this ad for this Lazy Boy collection and was like, this stuff is cool. This guy looks cool. I very distinctly remember visiting my grandparents in Indiana, and there was a Lazy Boy kind of a couple miles there, and I asked my dad to take me there. And so my dad and I went into this Lazy Boy, and he's like
Oh
in there
my.
with his 13-year-old son who's just like looking at this furniture. So I tell you all of that because I get the sense that your childhood was similar and that you were kind of interested in making things, interested in design, interested in art, kind of this, weird kid who had these very kind of clear interests. And I've heard you talk before about the kind of family craft table. And so I want to start this conversation just kind of talking about that childhood and that kind of very early interest in making things and kind of how that helped shape what you would go on to do.
Well, certainly. Well, thank you for your kind enthusiasm about my collection with Lazy Boy. I had a lot of fun doing that, and I thought there was a lot of opportunities to work with manufacturers, but I've always been intrigued by pure Americana or sleepy things. Like I did stuff with Keds when they were kind of a little more neutral. I don't know. I've always been intrigued by the underdog a little bit, but I'm amazed and delighted that at 13 you sought it out. But thank you. Um,
Yes. Before,
but
I mean, it's very possible you were like the first designer that I got interested in because,
oh,
this is pre-graphic design even, and that's when I really started to kind of go deep on a lot of these things. But um, yeah, that was a long time ago.
it's funny to me that you also had graphic design because when I was like 8 or 9, when somebody asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I for some reason I don't know why I would say I want to be a graphic designer,
Mm.
and I'm not even sure I knew what that was, but I knew I wanted to do it, and then I realized I have done it my entire life. So it really is. It's so strange the way we come in with our interest, and if people don't stamp them out, they can really bloom through our entire lives.
And so can you talk about that? And so your parent, I've heard you talk about this many times. Your parents were very encouraging of
Oh,
making things, of the arts, of creativity. And I'd like to come back to this idea that you said graphic designer. Did you have, as a child growing up, did you have definitions for that these things could be careers? Can you just talk about that kind of childhood and then that evolution into, oh, this is actually something I could do?
yes, yes. Well, I'm incredibly blessed with the most lovely parents. I adore my mom and dad, and still see them every day and talk multiple times. They're just fantastic to me. They're real heroes to me, and I don't. They were a very young family. I was born when my parents were 18, and I don't know how they had the graces to keep us together, keep us fed, and figure out what to do with their lives along the way. But they're very impressive to me, and the fact that they chose, especially at in the '60s, a time where there was no, they chose an unpaved road to go down. So that's the only road I've ever known. And when you don't have any natural urge to subscribe to normal things, it really is freeing. So I just never learned the normal things. And I was brought up kind of in school. Like we were just constantly in school. I don't mean like in a building, but we would like I'm a very passionate gardener, and I know it comes from we would walk around. My mom would point at certain plants, and we would identify them and over and over. So we were just constantly in this learning situation, and I was brought up in museums, and this was not any. We're not like fancy art people, and I think much of it had to do with it was some of the only air conditioned buildings in Texas in the summer. But thank God we went. So I had the exhibitions memorized at the Natural History Museum in Fort Worth, and I realized how peculiar it was, but they were unbridled in just making sure we were exposed and excited and had saw the joy of making. And then also there were many of us. I have 4 brothers and sisters, so more perhaps a workforce than a family at some point. But we added on to our houses. So my mom and dad had knew how to do just gajillions of things, and so they taught us how to do it. And then what they didn't know that they we learned together, and that was the
Mm.
exciting part, was to have those moments where you're like, it's uncertain, what, we didn't know where we were going. And really kind of, I realized what seemed normal to me at the time was pretty strange. Like we picked up and moved to Tehran when I was 12 for
Oh,
four
wow.
years.
Wow.
Some of the most beautiful moments in my life. But as an adult, I recognize that was both brave and peculiar
Yeah.
for my parents. I mean, can you imagine dragging 4 children to the Middle East? And
No,
I was the eldest at 12. So
that's crazy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't know exactly the right words. It's many words to describe that wonderful experience, but that's the kind of freedom to just choose and not exactly give a shit what other people think about it is really a huge blessing, and one I'm glad I never learned the too much caring about what people thought about what I did.
We're very similar. I feel like in this regard. And my parents were the same way. We didn't move to Tehran, but it was if they wanted to do something to the house, if they needed something, they made it all. And so my sister and I, we were around that from the beginning. Also, I'm I'm curious, because you said you told people you wanted to be a graphic designer, and you're not even sure you knew what that was, and that also resonates with my childhood. Because when I kind of discovered graphic design, it was I'm pretty sure it was through album covers, and then
Oh
going
yes.
on online and finding blogs and all of that. But I had never met a graphic designer before. There were no graphic designers in the town where I grew up, and I'm curious what that was like for you. Did you have models of Of
No,
careers or of jobs?
you know what I had? I had boxes. The morning, the things, the food that arrived in our house, all the boxes, if you tip the boxes over and look on the bottom, that's where all the color registration marks were.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I was hypnotized. I still am. Any kind of anything that's a color chart. My parents have for many years given me makeup palettes, like like for Christmas you get those
Yeah.
extravagant,
Yeah.
so beautiful, the most beautiful colors. I have, I mean, if you wish to wear makeup, fantastic. I don't, but I love to collect those things because they're the most gorgeous colors. So anytime something's color swatched, color next to each other, just blindingly good. Oh my God, I forgot your question. I was so excited to talk about color.
Like the models
Ah,
for
good.
actually like turning this into a career or a job, or that this didn't just have to be,
No,
fun stuff, I guess. You know what I mean?
it did, but what the bottom of those boxes made me realize there was a whole mechanical substructure to this thing that I didn't that somebody had to think about. So it made me thinking, oh wait, who did that? Who thought about that? And then when my parents explained to me what those things were and that this color
Mm.
plus this color is that part, oh my
Mhm.
God, my mind was blown. So I would collect like like the supermarket inserts in the paper on the weekends. They
Yeah.
used to be printed so fabulously before digital printing, where it was like with dot patterns and stuff. I
Yeah.
still I still have some of that stuff. I mean, just gorgeous. I was just fascinated with anything with printing. So I started to learn about fonts and leading and kerning, just because it was also fascinating, and printing presses, and it just kind of tumbled down.
This is so funny to me. I have a very distinct memory of being probably 3, 4, 5 years old in the grocery store with my mom and noticing that there were two signs next to each other with prices on them, and the twos on each of the signs were different. And I was like, do those twos not look the same? And years later was like, oh, that was my first introduction to typography.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah, the thing is, if we're not, like I mentioned a moment ago, if we're not beat down, that we're
Yeah.
encoded with such incredible stuff. I don't know whether you refer to it past. I don't know, whatever your version of how you are, what you are today. There's no denying that we come with very special
Mhm.
things that can be encouraged or muted. But thankfully, mine were I don't know. Thankfully for me, I'm thankful that mine weren't muted.
Yes, I think about that every day for myself also. I'm curious then though how, I mean, for many years for you, and we're jumping around a little bit in kind of your story, but late 80s into the 90s, you were known publicly primarily as a fashion designer.
Mhm.
How did that, I guess the question I'm kind of asking, you obviously were always doing all of these other things also, but how did that become the main thing? Was that something that kind of just happened? Was fashion a bigger interest at the time? How did that become kind of the thing that drove everything else?
Well, I'm very grateful for my fashion days, and I feel very lucky to have had the version I had, because most people have end up kind of tragic or beat up at the end, and I was able to wave goodbye happy. So
Mm.
I have really nice feelings about it all. But it was a very crazy, fortuitous ride. Um, I I like, once again, my along with my mom and dad, my grandmother, who we lost on April Fool Day. I'm not kidding. And if you know her, there's just no more perfect day for her to die than April's Fool Day. But she was like a North Star for me. She was always around my entire life. I mean, literally, we were together constantly and always in touch. I spoke to her almost every day of her life,
Mm.
and she was just magic, a complete wild woman. And I don't know how she did the things she did. She is kind of I guess there's my example of not caring what other people think about your choices. And she, like, she ran a beauty salon, all run and owned by women in the
Mm.
the 50s, and did all kinds of crazy things. She was turned out to be very good at marriage, come to find out, having done it many, many times. But among the things she taught me was how to sew when I was 9. And she gave me her old trestle machine that
Oh, right.
you have
Yeah.
to pump with your feet, that was then retrofitted at some point by a very untalented electrician, that whenever you hit the pedal, you not only received a shock, but it would go about 5,000 miles an hour. And that's what I learned to sew on, which was actually like pre-industrial machine. So she taught me how to sew. And so I mean, was endlessly making something. So I made lots of stuff for my sister, but this was also right alongside making lamps and
Mm-hmm.
gardens, and my brother and sister, I made a full fort with construction, like framing. We made so it was all, it was just a part of the things we did. But fashion is very kind of noisy,
Right.
and it's one of the few things that does, pretty much everybody responds to it to some degree. Even if you're not interested in it, you have some response.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing things that were highly irregular to the rest of the market, which caused me to get a lot of attention. And then all kinds of lucky things happened, like you know, kind of stumbling into getting to be in Neiman Marcus, buying stuff right when Beverly Hills was opening. And it kind of
Right.
exploded and sold out in seconds. So I kind of, as much as I stumble through things most of the time, I kind of got really lucky during fashion days. And then I've always had my mom and I have, and my boyfriend Tony and I have always been partners, in kind of
Right.
everything we
Right.
do, and that's been a really nice support system through the years. They we just understand each other, and they kind of I don't know. I figured out early on that I'm very. It's not that I'm unemployable, but I'm better served with my developing my own ideas. You
Yes, I
know,
feel that way also. I know what you mean.
yeah. I mean, I love being on a team. That's super fun, and I do like all that stuff. So it's not that I'm disagreeable, but I just prefer
Yeah.
my own projects.
I
Um,
mean, I guess what I'm curious about, and we kind of were talking about this before we started recording, about when you do a lot of different things, how that's confusing to people, and it's hard to kind of like describe what you were doing, and that there's an ease in identifying yourself as something, and you were known for many years, a decade at least, as a fashion designer, but you were always doing these other things. And I'm kind of wondering how you pushed up against that. Was that limiting in some way? How you were able to kind of think about, yes, I'm doing fashion, but I'm also doing all these other things, and that all can be a part of this creative life.
well, it was not an option for me to not do that. So it was
Mm,
very easy to accept the side effects of those choices, and it happened a lot in fashion because they don't. I mean, now highbrow and lowbrow things are are a little more of the moment, but at that time, that paradox was not pleasing,
mm,
and things like you would like we were one of the. I was one of the first designers to work with Target after Philippe Starck, and it was
right.
I can't believe how much shit I caught for that. Oh man, it just didn't make
because
any
it,
sense.
because it was Target and it was
Yeah,
it, right. Okay.
yeah, but it wasn't Target at the time. That was the
Right.
trouble. It was just, I mean, obviously Philippe Starck's a genius designer, and it was just the tides were just starting to turn. Now we know that that's a long footprint for them. But man, people were not. They thought you had to choose your lane. But
Mm,
there's precedent in this happened. It happened to Halston in the '70s with
yep.
when he went from couture to pennies. But he got, man, I had a cakewalk next to him. But yeah, it wasn't for as much shit as I caught, it was absolutely worth it because I never. This is the one thing I was told endlessly during fashion, and it broke my heart, which was, I love what you do. I could never afford it,
Mm,
and I mean, I couldn't have afforded it. It was, the clothes were completely handmade. They often involved multiple continents,
right.
weeks of hand work. I mean, it just insane levels of stuff. So I understand why they cost as they did, but yeah. So it was nice to start easing into making things with price tags that had single digits or two digits in front of it.
Right.
Um, and I approached everything with the same passion. It's, a $10,000 gown was the same to me as a back to school lamp for $12. It had to, had all the same tenets to me.
It's interesting to hear you say that too, and it maybe connects to all the work that you've done since that time, which I think all of that was there from the beginning. But it's interesting to me how, probably to a lot of people, you're known as somebody who makes books and writes books and produces and
Yeah.
designs books. And I'm kind of curious. I think there's something very democratic as the book as a form, which I can think speaks to this idea of accessibility that you're talking about. Also, I'm kind of curious how you got into bookmaking, and um, it's interesting to kind of connect it back to Lazy Boy, and kind of seeing your work then. And then I got into graphic design and kind of lost following your work, but then came back to it when you did the Charley Harper book, because that was, all the designers that I knew were interested in Charley Harper. And so it was like, that's kind of then when you came back into into my orbit. How did that come about, and how did that fashion work, you know, actually help shape how you think about making and producing books?
Oh, well, how interesting. No one's ever asked me that question before because, there's a real connection to this. I always said, if you want to get something done, get a fashion designer because if you can put on a live fashion show, you could run the government.
Mm.
This is one of the hardest things to do. You cannot believe the complications of that breezy little 15-minute experience. Is 9 months of work with an army of the most gifted people working on. It's astonishing. So, um, I took that same. I don't know, like the need to get it. I don't think I'm a perfectionist because I love the flaw, but I have a
Mhm.
real drive to get it as perfect as I can,
Mhm.
and that's books deserve that. Like a typo would put me in the hospital. So
Right.
beyond everything, just in the way of a couture garment, a book is the same. Everything counts. These things you're not seeing, the binding, the float, the
Mhm.
everything counts. So my latest book, which I'm so proud of,
Yeah.
is called The Best of Nest, and it's homage to my friend Joe Holtzman, who's one of the most exquisite artists I've ever encountered, and he designed and made out of the ethers this exquisite art project that ran for many years in the late '90s and into the 2000s, where he celebrated design and passion. I don't even. I
Mm.
mean, you have
Mm.
to speak
Mhm.
really vaguely when you speak about it because it was so disparate in what they were showing you, but there was this absolute precise thread that ran through it of passion. So it was a very unique oculus to build something around. But and also made by one of the most brilliant designers. Joseph Holtzman is such a good designer. He's an
Right.
interior
Right.
designer, a graphic designer, a topographer. I mean, he's just absolutely brilliant. So the fact I love his generosity to someone that skilled coming to make a magazine to shine lights on people he loved
Right.
and to celebrate it. And that's something I was so impressed with Joe, and I think that was one of the inspirations that started my book career because you can bring something new to this thing. And
Right.
I started my I started making the rounds through the book publishing world and was really shocked at all the rules.
Mm. Mhm.
It's like, well, but it's a book. It's like, no, well, yes, it is a book, and the colophon page goes on 7, and it's like, what?
Right.
Why? I
Right.
don't. And then no one could ever explain to me why. So, well, then it's not a rule. So, I finally ended up with a publisher, a brand new publisher that had just started, called American Modern, and it
Mhm.
was called Ammo, and it was run by a former group from Tasha, and really nice group who I made many books with. So they just agreed that all these rules were stupid and unnecessary, and let's come up with something new.
I love that. I also love how you describe Nest and this like generosity and, kind of sharing the interest, which is very clearly what you're doing with the books that you're making. The Charley Harper book, I think the Girard book, the Alexander Girard book, is the
Oh my
same
gosh,
way.
that
And I
one.
also think it's interesting how all of these people are kind of working in similar modes to how you're working on. They're moving between disciplines. I mean, I've heard you talk about Gerard, and you said something to the effect of his sensibility was the same, but the medium shifted. And that
Oh
that
yeah.
to me describes your work also. And I'm kind of curious what is there something you're trying to do with these books to kind of bring them, I mean, especially someone like Gerard and Charley Harper and even Nest to a way, they're known figures, but they're not that well known, and so there's some sense of you bringing them back into the public conversation. Is that a goal of yours to kind of bring these figures or bring this work to a new generation? And what are you kind of trying to do there?
Well, yes, it's amongst the goals, but I have to say I have a complete agenda with my books,
Mm,
and that is to bring light and show passions of another road or another option.
mm,
Because with every one of these books, or every book I've ever done, is always about another idea about something.
mm,
And when you have the opportunity to celebrate someone's life work, like I cannot believe that I've had these things plop in my lap, the entire life work of Charley Harper or Mr. Girard or, even like, Wayne White or,
Yeah, yeah.
it's astonishing that you get the trust of, and then, I mean, oh my gosh, the last thing you want to do is blow that. So I'm very passionate about every facet of it. And the most important thing when you're doing a book on someone else is that you must be invisible and remain so,
Mm,
because it's not about you. You got to know your place. And if you signed up for it, it's about learning their Rosetta Stone and only making decisions within it. And that's why when you look at Charley's book, or you look at, certainly with Mr. Girard's book, you see in a way, it's as though they did it, because
oh, I see what you're
I
saying. Yeah.
think it represents what their many facets. We're able to sort out a lifetime in a really interesting way. But what I want you to see, want the viewer to take away, besides being blown away at what humanity can do, is the possibility of following a passion can allow you to eat and have a really fulfilling life, not an unchallenged one,
Hmm.
but a we're just not often told that.
Right.
And you can hear me say it, but if I show you, you'll assimilate it differently. And a beautiful life well lived like Mr. Girard, must be celebrated. But once every one of my books has some bizarre story that, tumbling into the situation, literally all of them, several involving ghosts, and I'm not kidding.
Okay.
Um, the it, I just tend to do books on things and people I really understand, and that
Right.
that in a way makes it easier because I can just disappear.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not. I understand what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing. But I do think I don't know. Maybe we can kind of wrestle with this for a second. I
Mhm.
do think maybe it's because your work and your approach is so much in dialogue with these people that I feel like all of your books not that you are imposing a point of view or that you are visible, but there's very clearly connections between all of the books that come from your interest points of views, kind of,
Mhm.
philosophy, you know what I mean? So
Oh, absolutely.
I'm kind of curious how you think about that, of being both invisible but also uh shaping in some way, that kind of tension.
Well, it goes back to what I just mentioned about learning the Rosetta Stone. I am very
Mm,
interested in too much, actually, and so once you really can understand somebody, and I do it. I've in the case of Charlie, I spent the last 5 years of his life with him.
right.
I never met Mr. Girard, but boy, do I feel like I know him. But I know his grandchildren. I know so I know these people. So when you have the blessing of, I mean, imagine Mr. Girard's incredible 60-plus-year career of genius, and then you sort it out.
Right.
So that was a wild ride. And also when Mr. Girard passed in the estate was unable to find an American institution that could accept it because it was so gigantic.
Right. Right.
And it's shocking and heartbreaking that we have no American institution. So it was deacquisitioned to the Vitra archive in Wilhelmshaven,
Mm,
outside of Basel, and it was there for over 20 years by the time we went there. So I took 9 of us went. Was it 9? Yeah, 9 of us, photographers and scanners, for us to open the boxes, because after 20 years they had only been able to crack, I think it was like 7 or 8% of the boxes.
wow.
So they allowed us to go in there, and along with the Girard grandchildren, who are the Muslim Corey and Alacia Girard, truly angels, and open everything and restore what we could and photograph it and get it together. And it was truly one of the most mind blowing 9 days I've
I
ever had in my life.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I'm so jealous just hearing you talk about this.
Oh, it was incredible, and I'm kind of stuttering just thinking about it, because we had, I think it was 300,000 documents or something. It was some
Wow.
unbelievable number of documents that had to be sorted, and then so I couldn't work on the design, and the research was so intense I couldn't work on the words as well. So I was so lucky that I got to work with Kira Coffey, who
Mm,
sculpted all the words in the most graceful vernacular that sort of mirrors a bit like the way Girard's spoke. Like, vernacular changes all the time, and
yeah,
even little
yeah.
things like when one is listing three things, like she was pretty, happy, and sleepy. we would say put an and between the second and third. But that it grammatically was awkward. In like 50s and 60s, you would just stack the three words.
Mm.
So we there's little teeny nods to
Oh,
grammar
interesting.
from the time. We like the and all the type work was built from this barware that Mr. Girard had done in the 30s. It was exquisite, and we were able to rebuild every letter except for two of them, which we just guessed at what he would do. But I think we did it right. So anyway, it's very it's you have to be, first of all, a big fan of whomever you're working, because it's a ridiculous
Yeah.
amount of work. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, it's, oh
Yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
book, books are not for the faint of heart.
Yes, I agree with that. I want to come back. I want to come back to this idea about kind of the design and the writing, but I have another question first, just about the kind of research process. And
Uh-huh.
I've heard you talk before about kind of the importance of research in your work. You've said that you see yourself, kind of as much, or you think as much like an anthropologist, perhaps
Yeah.
as a designer, and you've said you feel a kinship with Margaret Mead. I'm kind of curious about your research process when you are, in that archive with those thousands of documents. Can you talk a little bit about kind of how you think about sorting through them? What is the story you want to tell? How do you start to put this together? Um, just a little bit about how that influences your work, both for the books, but also just for the more kind of design projects also, which seem very clearly research heavy in their process.
Oh, they do. Well, like I have to create my own. I kind of live in a without a lot of guideposts, but for me, without guideposts, it's like I float to the ethers. If
Mm.
somebody says do what you want, that's just poison to me. Because it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God. I remember one time I got a call from Tibor Kalman, who was the
Mm.
editor at Interview for a time, and it was during Fashion Days. He was said, well, can you do something for us for this one issue? I said, sure. So made a painting for him and sent it in. And I remember the phone call. It's like, well, we really like the painting, but we were expecting a dress.
Right.
See, if you don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, you have to be able to frame things. You got to set up your own. You got to pop the four post in for your framing to be able to make decisions within. Otherwise, oh my gosh, if anything's possible, then it is,
Hmm.
and then that's too much. So with books, it's really like a heavy research project that you have to get to the point where you feel it, like you feel like you know it.
Hmm.
I don't. It's not like you know it. You have to feel it. And so I have a process for making books that I've just developed on my own. I suspect it mirrors probably bits and pieces of others. But what I like to do is get all my files together and print them out in little 4x6 pieces, and then I cut them all up and I put them in envelopes, synergistic envelopes or project envelopes, and then I carry around these envelopes forever. And then I start just taping these little pieces together in strips, sort of creating chapters or movements or moments. And then I start with my roll. My roll starts. So I start carrying around this roll of stuff that can be rolled out because I move around a lot, so I have to be able to roll my roll out. And what I yeah, well, I call them writing the book, because you have this is the only way that I can assimilate the feeling, the ebb and flow, the breath, and all the necessary pauses that are in a book. I can't do it digitally. I have to walk up and down the book, staring at it, letting my emotions fall from page to page to get the feeling about the sequence. And books are very much alive, and their editing is much akin to a feature film, because people can only assimilate so much at one time. There's eye breaks. I mean, there's a million manipulations that can be done in a book to allow the reader to have a lovely experience.
Do you consider yourself a historian when you're working on these books?
Yes, I do, without any pedigree. Um,
Right.
I do, but I do know I am one of the probably four Girard scholars and Harper scholars too, because I know
Right.
everything about those guys. So that's that I definitely know I have more information. There's me and Kira and Alatiel and Corey Girard. We're the four.
Something I think about a lot in studying design history, I'm just kind of curious if you have thoughts on this. This is not something I was thinking that we would be talking about, but kind of hearing you say this, I'm interested. I always, one of the problems I think in graphic design education is, and I'm guilty of this as somebody who teaches in these programs, to sometimes reduce a lot of this stuff to just the images and to not put them in context and kind of think about where they came from and what, what these people were doing. And so I think of someone like Girard, who was working across all sorts of different things at a very particular time. Do we sometimes lose something if we just like look at the work and don't talk about the whole life, the context, the systems around it? And I'm kind of curious if you have thoughts on that. Do you ever worry, or is it a concern of yours, that people are buying these books just to look at as pretty artifacts instead of actually learning from them, like you're talking about, kind of showing this other way?
Well, there's that books are assimilated in many ways, and that is unfortunately a way that they are assimilated. Because I say unfortunately because it's only a piece of the story. But in the case of Charley Harper, I think what you just said is absolutely true. Charley's influence on current graphics is undeniable and
Hmm.
sort of outrageous. But what shocked me is all the just appropriation.
Right.
I would hear endlessly, "Did he use Illustrator?" It's like, no, he was an illustrator. It's a different idea.
Yeah.
So that's probably that book is probably the most influential on society that I've ever done.
Mm.
Girard is very influential too, but he is a rare master that's hard to parse. Like, I don't think anybody looks at Girard and thinks I can do that, because
Right.
you know what, you cannot.
Right. Right.
But with Charlie's got a can-do attitude that people can kind of embrace. So um, yeah, I need to know everything about things to fully embrace them. So I'm sad when people just skim it. But if that's the way you get there, maybe it will spark something to get you going deeper. But you spoke a moment about context, and yes, there's two ways to assimilate it. One is through just its visual beauty at this moment, but when you realize the levels of daring do that came about, like mentioning Girard's graphic work was just shocking and revolutionary and
Yeah.
mangy to some eyes. I mean, all those mix of clunky type
Right.
work and
Right.
weird spatial qualities, and then and then the sum of parts was just glory. He could
Yeah.
pull tricks that he produced. One document for a store that he made in 1961 called T&O, that
Okay.
was in Midtown Manhattan, and it was a store that sold his textile designs for Herman Miller alongside some of his passionate collections of folk art. So it was very,
Mm.
very new. Nothing looked like it. Also, the store looked like a spaceship. The ceiling covered in light bulbs.
Right.
Yeah, so you were buying these modern textiles, these ancient handmade clay things in a spaceship. So it was very beguiling, and also known as the place where Herman Miller employees got their discount to go
Okay.
buy things. So it just didn't work. But if you that one document for the poster, which is these bands of cutout color in these sort of different scroll and ribbon shapes with different typefaces that he constructed, is still one of the most revolutionary and
Mm.
influential design documents I think I've ever seen. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
It sounds. I know the store that you're talking about, but I'm not sure I know the document. I'll have to
You
pull
would
out my charter
absolutely
book.
know it. You would know
Okay.
it when you saw it, and then you'd be surprised at
Okay.
how far. But have a look, because that's the one. There's very few that you can point to as sort of a ground zero, but that one poster was wild. I still see it. Actually, it influences me. Yeah, you need to know context, because the things I'm always impressed with daring efforts, and
Hmm.
where our eyes today are used to noise, a lot of visual noise.
Right. Right.
You have to consider at the time or also the spareness. Like, you look at the
Yeah.
Herman Miller ads from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, like with when Charles Eames and
Hmm.
Girard and George Nelson were
Yeah.
actually modeling in the ads. They were very spare and gorgeous, and like Girard's invitations for opening up Herman Miller showroom in San Francisco was printed on a whisper thin tissue paper, which is like the I mean, who prints invitations on tissue paper? This is
Right.
this is a corporate invitation. So
Right. Right.
but that makes sense, because Herman Miller and the Miller family has a long history of being brilliantly supportive and daring and strangely conservative at the same time.
Yeah, yeah. I
Um,
mean, I could talk about like mid-century Herman Miller with you for hours easily. The Eames, Girard, George Nelson is a big hero of mine.
well, Nelson
Um,
was especially great. Then have you been to the archive in Wilhelmine, the
I have
Zoo?
not. No, not
Oh,
yet.
you get over there, because they have Nelson's archive too. They have Werner
I
Panton.
know, I know.
Yeah, it's
I
really
need to.
special.
I mean, especially for me with Nelson, just his kind of working as a designer across different mediums, but also his work as a writer, I think, is really interesting and has influenced, my thinking about working, across design and writing, which I actually connects back to what I wanted to ask you about earlier about the relationship between design and writing for you when you're working on these
Uh,
books. Where does the writing part come in? Because you are writing
yeah,
texts for these books also. Is that
yes,
something that's happening throughout that process? Is is writing something that's easy for you? I guess I should. Is that
it
something you
is.
enjoy also?
I do. I love it. It is very easy for me because it's just you. My head is like a weird lazy Susan that I can flip around to whatever part of the lazy Susan I need to operate.
Yeah,
And so when it gets to writing, which is not something I get to do very often, I kind of like constructing the sentences like painting. It's I don't write like it's not just sequence of letters to me. I see them. I don't have synesthesia, but there's something more lyrical and more beautiful about the
I know what
that.
you mean.
Do
Yeah.
you? Yeah, it's hard
Yeah,
to say.
I've talked to people before about how I, as someone who's not trained as a writer but does a lot of writing now as part of my work, I think of my writing as a form of design. I'm thinking about it structurally, visually, how the sentences kind of flow, like all the language that I use to describe design is also what I'm thinking about when I'm putting together a text.
Well, it's kind of all when you have that head, it's all the same.
Yeah,
And I guess it goes back to your point that we made a moment ago about the designer, all the artists I've made books on. It's the same thing. They just have their what they have, and then they're also missing any sort of fright to do something new. And so if you, that's kind of the perfect combination is to have enough knowledge, be sophisticated enough to know it, and then be unafraid to jump in.
I've heard you talk before about your interest is in process over outcome. And I think that very much speaks to this whole conversation. And I'm kind of curious how you think about the outcome itself, though. Like are when you are starting projects, are they process first and then you think, hey, this is a book, this is a chair, this is a interior, or like how do you actually start to think about where all of this research, all of this thinking, all of this making, when it actually starts to become a thing?
Well, it usually happens just because one of my favorite films is Anti-Mame, and there's that great line
Mm,
about knowledge being power,
mm-hmm.
and that stuck to me very early on. So there's no downside or no limit to how advantageous it is to having information. And so
Right.
just the more you can suck it in. So when I feel like when I have as much as possible, then I can construct something new because I wouldn't want to look at a chair and think I can make a chair. I'd be much more interested in a cloud formation or a new plant structure or, Etruscan vase handles. I prefer a non-traditional cross-pollination, which would have probably got me in so much trouble during my fashion days. I mean, I'm glad I can't get uh, canceled from stuff I did 30 years ago. But because when we moved to Iran, I remember looking out the windows and going, "Wait, where's the lines?"
Oh
And
yeah.
it was like, "What? Why are we pretending that there's lines? It's all one thing. It's just
Right.
so clearly from the air, it was all one thing." So
Right.
that really shook me. I remember very, very strongly under that understanding. So with that in mind, I thought, "Oh, everything can go together." And so between
Right.
that and then seeing this Three Stooges episode I saw as a kid called Slippery Silks. Have you ever seen that one?
I don't think so.
Oh my god, it's still so good. Every time I watch it, I can't stop. It's
Okay.
they were plumbers, and they went to this lady's house who had hired them to put on a fashion show, but they were plumbers. So they went ahead and did it. So they did a whole fashion show that was made out of furniture, and it blew my mind.
Oh,
It blew my mind.
I know that I haven't seen this one, but I know which one you're talking about.
Well, I saw it when I was 6 and my mind melted. And I thought that it just was like that. Oh,
Right.
I get it now. It's like now
Right.
this Three Stooges has made me think I get it. So that's the thing that stuck with me, which is this that you can do anything.
Yeah.
As long as you have information and a warmth and a passion for it, then you can do anything. It doesn't mean that it's not going to be good always, but if you're attached to the pathway and the making and the buoyancy and the percolation in your body that you feel when you're creating,
Yeah.
that's all that counts.
Right.
Because often in commerce too, it's turned over to the other entities. It's in the store. It's in 3,000 stores. Well, it sold great or it didn't sell. That doesn't mean your design was anything more or less. It's just a result of things. So, as a designer, I think that's one of the best parts of, or information I can impart to people is just to not get attached to the outcome because it's so rarely in your control, and it often misrepresents the actual outcome.
Right. Right. Yeah. I love that. I completely agree with that. And speaking of outcomes and kind of this idea of designing anything, what's next for you? I mean, anything that you can talk about. What are things that
Yeah.
you're thinking about now, or what are projects you're working on, or even what are forms or mediums that you're kind of interested in working in next?
Well, I'm continuing down my book mode, and I'm working currently on a book on Alexander Girard's photography. It's no surprise he was a
Right.
brilliant photographer as well. I'm also working on a garden book I'm really excited about. But about 10 years ago, I kind of got this strange feeling to be, I'm not saying more purposeful, but I really thought, how can I help? So I wanted to try, because of the way I was raised and, raised with sort of without a TV in the living, but a craft table, there was just so much good that came out of that, and the conversation and the ease. And I know like the way conversation changes when your hands are busy. So there was just so much good in that. I thought, how can I translate all this stuff I know and what my parents taught me? So we started coming up with fun ideas for kids. So I made a book on kids, activities, and kind of focused it there. And then we started doing a lot of crafts. But I'm super excited because in the next couple of weeks, we launch a gigantic new arts and crafts collaboration with Walmart called Smarts and Crafts. And I'm so excited about it because Walmart has incredible reach, and they've been very, very interested in trying to help bring joy to families. And it's just been a real pleasure working with them. So there'll be a very large online component. We've been the last month producing many stop animation videos, and it's a very exciting thing that launches in just a couple of weeks called Smarts and Crafts.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I love the Girard photography book too. That's such a great idea.
Oh, well, and you know what? There's 6,500 images that are in the archive not kidding, in Santa Fe Folk Art Museum, where they have a big collection of his stuff too. So we're working on getting a grant to have them scanned, and
Yeah,
I've seen about 500 of them, and they're mind blowing.
Oh yeah, I can't wait for that.
They're incredible. He hung out with George O'Keeffe and Nelson, all those people that you admired. But I mean, George O'Keeffe like busting a gut laughing. We don't see that usually.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's a new look.
My last question, and this is the question I used to end all of these episodes. I'm curious what you're reading right now.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's see. I am one of those. I'll have several things going.
I had a feeling. That doesn't surprise me, Todd.
Right? You know what? I'll just tell you I don't know how to answer that exactly, but I'll tell you the last book I opened, and it's a Andy Warhol catalog from a Swiss show in 1962, and it's a remarkable catalog, and it's an incredible zenith of design because it's printed on kind of newsprint. It's very kind of crappy. It looks like it was maybe like made at a catalog company. It looks like the Sears catalog.
Right.
But wow, and the most daring, awkward graphics. And, I have a really big library, too much now.
Yeah, I had a feeling. That's why I was excited to ask you this question.
Well, that was literally the last book I picked up. But if you ask me in a few hours, it'll be another answer.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds exactly right. Todd, this was such a wonderful conversation. I mean, as I said at the beginning, your work has inspired and influenced me for many years, and this was such a joy to talk to you about all of this. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I had such a nice time speaking with you, and I appreciate your interest. I think we have a lot in common.
This episode was recorded on April 7th, 2021. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can support the show on Patreon and find previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.